In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to do remote viewing from your cell phone to your Dahua NVR. So that means that you could be at a remote location and you could view the different camera imaging from your cell phone through wireless networking. When I say wireless, I mean 3G or 4G. So through cellular communications. Remote viewing, I'm not talking about being on your Wi-Fi network where we just need to map the IP addresses. I'm talking about remote viewing if you're in a different location. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate how to set up the remote viewing. I also differentiate between what it means to be on Wi-Fi and versus 3G. They are both wireless. It's just the one is a local and the one is a WAN or a wide area. It goes through the wide area network. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log in to my NVR. Now you can see that there is an IP address there. I am sitting on my local network. That means that my computer over here is actually plugged in to the same switch that my NVR is connected to, and that is why I have an IP address. So in my little network here for this video, I'm on the I've made a class A address. The classes different are more of an old-fashioned thing, but the 10.0.0.0 network means it's class A, as opposed to B, C, D, and or B, C, or classless. But if that doesn't make sense, don't worry about that. You can Google class and classless IP addressing. The point is, in order for me to communicate with my NVR on the network, it needs to have an IP address. So I'm using a web browser to connect to the NVR, and I had already set up the NVR by giving it a IP address. Right, so that's what this address is here, and I've used a fixed address. I don't want the IP address to keep changing. Okay, so it's called a static address. So I'm just going to log in. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to settings, and just to show you the where's that TCP IP stuff, you can see that I have the IP address and my default gateway. Now, in order for your remote view to work, you need to have a router that has access to the internet. And the router is actually your gateway. Think about, in order to leave a house or to enter a house, we usually have a gate or some sort of door, a doorway or gateway. So the router is the gateway to the world. And in order to get to the world, we need a router. And that's why the gateway address or the router address happens to be positioned here. So let me just go and log into my router. Okay, I've got a router here, and you can see that the LAN address of my router, I just happen to be using a TP-Link. The model is TL-MR3420. You can see its IP address is 10.0.0.2. Who gave it that IP address? I gave it that IP address. That's the router's address on the network. So if I'm looking for this router, I'll be searching for 10.0.0.2 on the network. So if I want to ping it means check if there's connectivity. I could say ping 10.0.0.2, and you can see that it is accepting these packets, which means the router is available on my local network. Note LAN, local area network, as opposed to WAN, which means wide area network. So this is my local network. Moving back to the camera settings, the NVR settings, so you can see that the router's IP address happens to be my NVR's gateway address. So you need to set that up. Now, we'll look at the connections tab. Now, these ports are very important. When incoming packets arrive at your router, they are going to be looking for specific ports and IP addresses. See, what the router does is it gets a packet, and then it says, you are looking for XYZ port. I'm configured, not programmed. It's actually, the word is configured. I'm configured to respond if I get a packet sitting on port, looking for port 3 7777, as you can see here, then the router knows to forward it to a server or computer, or we call it a server, on your local network. Now, this may not make sense and you may have to watch the video more than once, but as we go along, you'll see that I'll be linking this up with what I'm saying now and what I'm going to say in the future. So it might be a little bit confusing now, and I don't expect you to understand it all at this moment, but I'm just giving you some foundational stuff. Okay, so these ports are very important. You've got a TCP port, a UDP port. UDP means that the packets they're both connectionless, but UDP means the packets get sent without regard. There's no facility to check if the packet actually arrived safely. Whereas TCP has the ability to be monitored. Did the packet get there or not? So there is some sort of replying system, and there's flow control and all those things. So usually when we set up cameras for remote viewing, we're actually interested in the TCP port. I'm not interested in the UDP. It rarely works on cameras, and it's more for TV viewing. If you're streaming TV, whether the packet got there or not is not as important as whether, say, TCP, where it's important. Maybe it's email. Email will be sent via TCP. Either the packet got there or it didn't. Whether it didn't, you'll get notified that this packet never got sent. Whereas if it's TCP, whether it's UDP, if you send the packet, you'll never know if it got there or not. It's like the post. Whereas TCP is like a couriering service. Once you send it, you can track it, and then you can, when the receiver receives it and signs for it, you'll get a notification that this person got it. So it's very reliable. Okay, so when we set up remote viewing, we use TCP. So what this is, these are different protocols. They're networking protocols. So you've got TCP, UDP. HTTP is the internet default port, and it happens to be 80. And then the secure port is 443. And then you've got the RTSP port. If you want more information on remote view, I do have a video on how to set up Hikvision stuff where I went into a lot of detail. Okay, let's move on. Remember that port number. When you're setting up the cameras, remote viewing, you need to have this port number handy. So in this case, it's 377. Can you change it? Yes, as long as what you change it on your NVR and your router match each other, because the router and the NVR's ports need to be mapped to each other. Okay, so let's carry on. There's the port. Now, you may have heard of something called DDNS, Dynamic Domain Name Service. Now, what is the reason for this whole port forwarding story? Is that, say you go to a website, say you go to www.cisco.com. Now, Cisco have their own IP address for cisco.com. Web browsers do not understand names. They need to go and convert the name to an IP address. So www.cisco.com rarely means something else. And you can go and look this up if you want to. I think it's nslookup www.cisco.com. Please tell me I've spelled it right. Yes, there we go. So Cisco's actual website IP address is 104.64.240.170. So if I typed in here 104.64.240.170, Mozilla or Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, whatever you use, would actually skip the domain name lookup service. So what happens is, in the internet there are servers called domain name servers which actually have tables, and they match the name to the name, like cisco.com, to its IP address. So only one this IP address can only be given to one server. The IP address of Cisco, 104.64.240.170, as I've just looked it up, can only be present at Cisco, which means nobody else can actually have that IP address, because that is called a public address. It means that it's a very unique address in the world, which only packets looking for that address will go to Cisco. Right. So the thing is that your router does not have its own public address. If it did, when we use IP version 6, for example, your router would not need to do DDNS. It would just be DNS. Your router would have its own name. Maybe you've got your own domain, but most people do not have their own domain. Therefore, they do not have their own static IP address. And people who do, some people who even do have their own domain, often have something called a dynamic IP address. And the reason is that your service provider, whether it's AT&T, Verizon, whatever, Bharti Telecom, MTN, whatever, Vodafone, whatever telecoms provider you use, usually provide you a leased address. So they'll give you an address, but tomorrow morning you might switch on your router. Or, okay, it was on, but tomorrow morning you might find that your router's IP address, public address, changed. That's not the 10.0.0.2 local address I'm talking about. Why would a router have two addresses? There's a local address and a public address. Is the local is for inside the network, and the other IP address is for outside the network, the WAN side, the internet side. So you are, when you pay your service provider, whatever it is, money for data and your contract and so on, they provide you with a lone IP address, but that IP address changes. And because it changes, you cannot map it on your phone to a fixed address. When your software says what is the server address that you are trying to link to, you can't put 104.64.240.170 and think it's going to be like that tomorrow, the next day, the next day, and the next day, unless you have bought an IP address in the case of the Cisco's website. So 90% of the people do not have that option, so they have to get something called a dynamic, a DDNS option. And what the DDNS does is they say, well, we'll give you a name, and when the web browser or your app comes to look up the IP address, we will host that table for you and keep forwarding your service provider's IP address. So they're keeping track of your service provider's IP address that your service provider has given you, and they will keep updating that to your loaned dynamic domain name service name. Okay, bit of a mouthful. Okay, so let's carry on. So you can see here, this is a public IP address. Now, moving back to the config, why I told you that whole story is on the NVR, you can see that there are options for DDNS. Now, you could set this up directly on your NVR, but now my NVR is behind a router. So the router needs to actually have the DDNS settings. It's not important to set it up, on the NVR. So for this whole settings that I'm going to show you, I'm not actually doing it on the NVR, I'm doing it on the router. So it says here enable, but I'm not going to enable it. You could enable it, but I don't do that because I set up NVRs behind routers, and therefore for me I feel it's more secure. So when I say this is a video for remote viewing, I'm actually not doing anything on the NVR. All of this is done on the router. So now you've seen the interface of the Dahua web login option, and I'm now going to show you how to set up the settings for the router. So you can see I do not enable that. Now I go to my router, and in my case, as I said, I'm using the TP-Link TL-MR3420 option model. It's an old router, probably about 4 or 5 years old, and you will see there's an option for forwarding, and you'll see there should be an option for DNS, right? So I go to the DNS, and you can see that the router has an option for COMEX, dynamic DNS, and no IP. What are these things? These are private companies that offer this as a service. You will then, most of them are actually free, and there are much more than this. You will then register with them, and then they will allow you to have maybe 1, 2, or 3 names which they will map to your ISP, Internet Service Provider, or your telecoms company's IP address that they are loaning you. You see, if I go look at my current IP address on my router, you can see that its current IP address is 41.144.192.27. But tomorrow, that'll be a different IP address. It will keep changing. So what happens is that who's got to map that? If I go and set up my client here and I give the IP address 41.144.192.27 here, yes, it'll work today and maybe even tomorrow. But maybe my router gets rebooted. Maybe it just the network just gives a new IP address, and you can see how often this thing is updated. So then your client will try and log into the camera and suddenly it'll say no connection. And what happens is when you use these services called no IP or HIC Online or Dynamic DNS, they are actually what they're doing is they keep checking in with your router and making sure that they have your latest IP address. Because remember, your IP address keeps changing. Okay, so the easiest and quickest way is to just use one of the free ones. You could use no IP, and then it gives you the option to go and register. So all you do is you go and you register. You sign up, okay? And I've already done that. So you sign up. Let's see. So now once you've logged in and once you've created your own account I'm using no IP for the example, then what you'll do is it says here add hostname. So let's choose a hostname. Now for this example, I'm just going to use something that's easy. So let's use, what's the date today? The date is 6 December, and I'm just calling it, let's say 2016. And the options, they give you a few options here. You can choose these, it's fine. I'm just using ddns.net. And you say add hostname. Cool. Now it says it's been created. So what I've got to do now is match what I've just done, the hostname I've just created onto my router. So you're going to have to put in your username and password, and that is the username and password to log in to noip.com. So, and the domain name was 6. Now it's caps the 6 December, so it was lowercase. 6 December 2016.ddns.net. So you got to go 6 December 2016.ddns.net. Right. And you've got to put in your username and password. And for this part of the video, I'm not showing my password, my username. I'm just going to quickly put it here. Whoops. Right, so what I've done now is I've put in my username and password, and then that is the domain name, and then I said enable DNS, and I said login, and then it actually logged in. Right, now I say save. Cool. Now I go to port forwarding, so we can maximize this again. Right, so now we go to port forwarding, and I set rules. It's really a rule. So I'm going to add new. I'm going to say add new. What port am I using? Now remember, doesn't this look familiar? 3/777. Don't you remember that that was the port that you had on your NVR? So that's it. and the internal port I just leave blank, and the IP address. What is the IP address? It's the IP address of your NVR. What you're doing is you are telling your router, you're saying, if somebody sends a packet to me and they are looking for port 377, please forward the packet to the client or server on my local network behind the router who is sitting at IP address 10.0.0.251. Where is 10.0.0.251? Remember in the beginning of the video, I showed you that I gave my NVR the address 10.0.0.251. You may give your root, your NVR's addresses 192.168.1.1, and then your next NVR 192.168.1.2. But then it means that your IP address here will be 192.168.1.1. You see, you've got to match these up, otherwise it will not work. And the protocol, don't say UDP. You'll have problems. Well, in the networks that I've worked on, there's problems. You can say TCP. I just say both. And the status, it's enabled. And that's it. Sometimes they ask you like the protocol, is it a gaming port and all these things. Try and leave that blank, because then it forces you to use a certain range of ports. Now, just by the way, you might be wondering, like, what are these ports? Well, there are about 60, how many? Let's just see these port numbers. I think there's about 65,000, yeah, somewhere here. You see a list of UDP and TCP port numbers. They're actually already defined, and you can read about them in the RFCs, which is the request for comments. And you'll see the full list, starting at port 0, all the way, you'll see common ports like 21, FTP, 22, TCP. What that means is that Windows, in the IP stack, has built in these specific port numbers, so they are set in the IP stack, and they are defined. Which means you can't say, instead of using port 21 for FTP, I'm now going to use it for hostname service provider. You can't do that. Well, you will, yeah. So you'll see the common one, port 80. That's the web port, HTTP port. You can see now, you'll see what these ports mean. You see, you just need to go onto the Wikipedia or read the RFCs. Easy to become good at computers? Spend Friday nights reading RFCs. Alright, so you can see these are all the ports that are available. And there's about, I think there's 65,000, 49. And yeah, it goes up to 65,535. It's not physical ports. You can't go and pick up your computer and see 65,535 ports. These are software ports. Alright, because remember that your computer is having many conversations at once, and it's easy to actually show that. You can do a netstat search, and you can show each port that is open on your computer. It's a good way to check if you've got a virus, is to actually see which ports are open on your computer. And when I say ports, again, I mean it's in software. Every time you open up a web page, for example, this Cisco page, that's one port. This config page, that's one port. This web page, that's one port, for example. So that's why your computer needs so many ports, because your computer is having many conversations at once. Your email might be open, one or two ports even. Alright, so let's move back to this. And just so I did mention something called RFC, and these are called the request for comments. And this is available on the IETF website. And all the, no, well, not all, a lot of the publications about computer networking is available on the, I think it's called the Internet Engineering Task Force. And you can read a lot about it here, and if you really want to get into detail, you can also go look on the IEEE website. Okay, but this is now getting very technical off the topic. Okay, so we're getting back to setting up the port. So do you see that? 377, the IP address of the NVR, then you say save. Right, there it is. So you're actually done now. You're actually done. Now you can set up the other ports as well, 443 and 554. Where did I get those from? Remember when I showed you the connections tab, 443 and 554. It's the different methods that your phone will use to log in. For example, if you're going to use your phone to log in through a web browser, usually you'll do this on a laptop. But you can do it on your phone, especially if your phone supports Flash. Then your phone will be using port 80. But if you are using the client, you'll go and look for the Dahua client, or whether you're using Hikvision, whatever you're using, then it won't use port 80. It will use other ports. For example, it will use, not that one, 3/777 or 443 and so on. Okay, sorry, 554. So you must set these up as well. So going back to the router now, there you go, I've set up these 2 ports. And also, when you want to view your NVR on your wireless network, your Wi-Fi network, this is also important. Okay, so actually you're done. Now it's time to go to the client and to set up the client.
Right, now it's time to set up the client, and I'm using the DMMS software. So now I have a cell phone. It doesn't matter which software you're using in terms of Windows, mobile, or iPhone, iOS, or Android. It doesn't matter, available on all of them. So what you'll do is you'll go advanced, and let's add one, and we call it device name, just something so that you that's familiar to jog your memory. So this was the YouTube one, and now it's asking for the address. Now what address we're going to use? Remember, the domain name that you just gave, 6 December 2016. Now, very important, dot, well, let me just check it quickly. Now ip.com, it was .ddns.net. The port, again, look at that. It must match. So if you change your port, and I highly recommend you do, if you change it to say 37,741, then do that on your router and on your NVR. And then the username for your device, I'm going to just put in my username. Now I'm going to choose my cameras and see if it works. Now, just to prove to you, there's no Wi-Fi there. Can you see? The Wi-Fi is off. This is purely through a 3G network. Now it'll be looking for the channel. Look, it takes a bit of time because my network is actually a little bit slow, but it already telling me that system is opening the video is good enough. I know that the picture will come soon. And while we're waiting for it, let me just chat to you a little bit. If I was on the Wi-Fi network, that is not the same as remote viewing. That is simply just a loopback. What you're doing is just connecting on the inside of your router to your NVR. So even if it, come on, timed out. Let's try again. Let's see how my signal is. My signal's got 3 bars. Okay, so what happens is with the Wi-Fi is it'll work while it's in the vicinity of your router, because it's on the inside of your router and it's logging into your NVR just through the Wi-Fi. You can see there's the video. So this means that wherever I am in the world, and you could do that too, if you are logging in now with these same credentials, you would see this, what actually is a pool that is half empty. You would be able to do this. Now, maybe if I didn't change the username and password and all this stuff, you'd be able to do it, but don't try and do it and then think you've made a mistake when you can't log in. It's obvious that I'm going to go and change the settings now, or remove these from the from my router, the settings from the router. But the point is, if you followed my instructions, you will now be able to do remote view, and hopefully you'll also understand a little bit about remote view. If you want more information on this, including the theory, please watch my video on the about how to set up the Hikvision remote view, where I go into a little bit more detail. And anyway, so that's how you set up remote view. And if you just, when I was talking about the Wi-Fi, in terms of setting up the viewing on your local network, then you wouldn't have had to put in your DNS address. You would have just put in your IP address. For example, say you wanted to do, for example, say you wanted to do it just on your Wi-Fi, what you would do is you would, in this point, just put in your local address. Now, it wouldn't work if you're outside of your Wi-Fi network. Now, the other thing is, it has to be connected to the Wi-Fi for it to work. You see? Alright, I'm not going to demonstrate that because I have to put in the password and so on for the Wi-Fi. Alright, so that brings me to the end of how to set up your Dahua network settings for remote view, and I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.